Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Enchanted Garden Book Club. This is our final discussion for 2021. I'm Elizabeth Wilcox, and this is Mary W. Jensen. And we're going to be discussing The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher. I think we should just jump right in with that first question. In what ways is this retelling similar to the original fairy tale?
This one I actually thought matched up a lot of the points. You do have the setting, it's in the north, kind of the Finland, Norway area. The characters, almost all the main characters, you can see direct connections to ones from the book, or ones from the original story. And just that general, the plot point journeys, the basic ones.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because I'm realizing I did not say, this is the original fairy tale is Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen. And so also to clarify, you may not have heard of T. Kingfisher, or you may have. It is a pseudonym for Ursula Vernon. And so this is a retelling of The Snow Queen. I agree. This one is actually quite similar in that you can very much tell at every step of the way, oh, this is from this part of the original story. That character is this character from the original story. I think the changes are going to be interesting to note when that question comes up here soon, but the setting, the characters, a lot of the details about the Snow Queen herself are there. Right down to the Gerda and Kay live with their grandparents. You'll notice in the original fairy tale, no mention of mom and dad, just grandma. Only grandma is mentioned in the novel retelling here too, which I thought was a nice small touch. There's a few figures that exist in the original fairy tale that don't show up, but I think everyone who shows up in this tale is in the original fairy tale, including the raven and the reindeer. One notable difference that I guess I should probably have saved for question 2. I say the raven is from the original tale. Technically, it's a crow in the original tale, but it's an highly intelligent blackbird. So either way,
Still
there's
that
a
correlation.
correspondence. Yeah,
Yeah.
a highly intelligent blackbird that can talk to humans is present. So I think that counts. Any other ways I'm not thinking of that the retelling matches up with the original tale? It's pretty darn close.
Yeah. Like even a lot of the magic that was used, like talking to plants and animals was in there.
Yeah. That the base elements that Kingfisher uses here to build her novel are 100% analogs to original components. It's more that she pruned things out, I think, of the original tale than that she shoved things in. Which leads us to question number 2. How are these two stories different?
I think, yeah, you really led into that well with the pruning because, like, it's so unusual. She actually removed things that didn't feel necessary. We did not get that strange story about the hobgoblin and the shards of ice or
Yeah.
glass.
Oh, the hobgoblin who
I'm like,
is
wait,
the
this has
devil.
nothing to do with the actual Snow Queen. It's
Mm-hmm.
a strange introduction to this story.
It's
But
an excuse for why Kay is attracted to the Snow Queen. That you can tell that T. Kingfisher, she was just like, actually, boys kind of are dicks without magical mirrors sometimes. So I don't think we need that.
Yeah, it just made it part of his character instead.
Yeah, which I thought was like, and then she put it in a good way too. Like there's that kind of fairy tale feel of maybe he was born with a little bit of ice in him personality wise, but it doesn't need a sliver of a magic mirror to get lodged in there for that to be true. So she just cut the magic mirror portion out completely. We don't need splinters of glass falling into people's eyes to excuse their bad behaviors, basically. She gives a little bit more culpability for decision making back to people who do cold-hearted things, I think, by making that
Yeah.
change. Um,
A little bit on the goblin though that I noticed there is kind of a relevance still. Instead of an actual mirror that's making people feel small and unworthy and ugly, it's the queen's gaze itself.
that's true. The queen's gaze does do a lot of what the mirror does for someone looking through it.
Mm.
You see yourself the way someone looking through the hobgoblin's mirror would see you is a really good. I had not thought of that, but that is actually 100% what's happening with the Snow Queen's kind of magic power to make you feel like shit. Which can you imagine? Like honestly, like OP. Like that's of course people wither under her gaze. That's like a toxic relationship, but like blasted at you by the power of magic.
Mm.
That's too much. Oh gosh. Um I noticed one of the biggest kind of plot points that is removed in this novelization is the whole thing with the princess and her prince. And
Yeah, the
oh, is the
prince and the
prince
princess.
K or
Yep.
not? That whole chapter, that whole story within the story from Hans Christian Andersen, gone. That we don't need that. That's gone. Um, Going through though, we still had the woman with the magical like the magical woman who has the garden, who just kind of wants the company of Gerda and so enchants her to stay at her house. That's still there. The obviously the robbers and the robber girl are still there.
And the pigeons.
And the pigeons. She
The
even has
pigeons
her
were also frozen.
pigeons.
And some got
Um,
frozen by the snow queen. Yep.
there's still that element of what is going on with these robbers in the woods that they seem to be implying that they might eat people. That's still there. Because the prince and the princess are cut out, Gerda doesn't have an entire like entourage that are murdered by the robbers. She's alone except for her raven
Mm-hmm.
friend. So that's not there, which I think helps us to be able to understand liking the robber girl better. Like she didn't actively murder anybody except for another robber, come to think of it. But you know, like she's not already culpable of a horrific crime
Mm-hmm.
uh before we start to like her. Um so that's helpful. Um what are the other big differences? I'm sure haven't mentioned.
Well, Kay in the original story, he actually doesn't choose to go with the Snow Queen. He just ties his sled up to this other sled, and then it turns out it like changes into the Snow Queen, and he's like,
Yeah,
whereas in the book, it's his choice to go with her.
that's true. In both, Kay
He
loves
has more agency.
snow and thinks that snow
Mm-hmm.
is the only beautiful, perfect thing. But in this retelling, he 100% chooses to go with the Snow Queen and is like, yes, I will climb out my window into your sleigh. That's amazing. And you're right. Like, that's another layer of way that Hans Christian Andersen is like, makes sure that Kay even though he did become a dick because of the mirror, is definitely a victim of the Snow Queen. Like, he was abducted. He ended up and then enchanted. Like uh she kisses him, and that makes him not notice the cold. Like, the cold is still killing him. It's bad for his body, but because the Snow Queen smooched him, he doesn't feel it. And she's like, if I can't kiss you another time or you'll die. I mean, pretty horrifying too, because I feel like Hans Christian Andersen never tells us the age of the kids involved, but there's this.
Yeah, at some points they seem very young, and other times, like by the end of the story, like, oh, we're all grown up now.
Yeah, it's very odd in that way. I feel like, how long was Gerda looking for Kay? Because that's very vague, but in
Mhm.
places, because it starts out like they're very much young, like they're kids, and it's when they're kids that the Snow Queen's abducting Kay and kissing him in her sled and stuff. Which, can you say predator? I'm just saying. Uh Not real great of her to do, whether she wants a kid or, like, it's not clear either. Like, is she just like, why is she taking Kay? What's her deal? And anyway, either way, Kay chooses to go, and they're on the cusp of adulthood in the
Mhm.
retelling very clearly. And that's another difference. Like, they're still kids barely, but they're very much like becoming adults over like the year or so that the story takes, because that's where they are. They're like, I'm about to be old enough that I'm thinking about marriage and romance and what
Mhm.
I'm going to do for a living, and that makes sense at my age. Which was a nice clarification to get after Hans,
Yeah.
you sometimes delightful weirdo. Who knows how old they were in your story? But Gerda did like the. That's another difference. Gerda never throws her red shoes into the river to ask the river to give. Like, Gerda makes the choice too. Like, in the Hans Christian Andersen story, it's very much accidental. She's like, oh, I better get my shoes. Oh, I'm now
And
literally
she's
being
being
swept
swept
downriver.
away. Yep.
Well, I might as well look for Kay while I'm out here. uh,
Without my shoe.
right? Uh,
Freeze to death. Come on.
Seriously.
You
Like,
definitely feel the cold war in the book.
completely unprepared, completely swooshed away down the river. And in the book, she's like, I am making this decision to go get Kay because I refuse to believe that he wouldn't want to be saved. The Snow Queen enchanted him. I'm going. Um, so both of the, like, it seems like the biggest changes are just get rid of some of the extra stuff that we don't need to figure out how to make space for, especially because in that kind of fairy tale world Hans Christian Andersen builds, there could be princes and princesses all over the place. Who knows?
And no
But
castle here.
yeah, I'll just throw that in there. But you can tell that, T. Kingfisher, Ursula, she 100% did the research for the actual area this would take place in and the cultures there, and was like, yeah, we don't need a random princess to dilute that reason. Like, that we'll just stick with the actual people that would be in this actual region of the world, and we don't cut that out.
Yeah.
So she gets rid of some extra that makes it kind of less based in a real world. And then she gives Kay and Gerda and really everyone involved a lot more agency, I think, are the biggest differences at core.
And the religion.
Yes. There's a lot less, and it's not even that
We're
she
not saved by prayer.
yes. And it's not even that she completely cut Christianity out or something, because it's still clear that there's the old traditional tales that, like, the grandparents, and that there's the more local ancient, like, religions and traditions that she's including and describing. But then, you know Gerda can't think of anything else to sing and tries to sing a hymn. She, like, you can tell that it's, yeah, they had this kind of default Christian upbringing, but it's the actual folklore that's local and native to them that matters for this story. Um, and both of these lead us right on into question 3. Did this retelling of the Snow Queen retain enough of the original story to be satisfying? Why or why not?
It's probably a strange thing to say, but I thought the book felt more Snow Queen than the original did. Because the original story just had so many little like side vignettes that felt like their own little fairy tales and had very little to do with the Snow Queen herself. I felt like she had more of a presence in the book, even though it was still Gerda's story and journey.
Yeah, I feel like that rings really true. I think it's something very interesting that Kingfisher grabs here all of the elements of the Snow Queen that people bother to remember, that are really the ones that are memorable, and says, I'm going to use those and ignore those other ones because Hans Christian Andersen was kind of a weirdo and I don't
Mhm.
empathize with or agree with all of those things being there. Um, I think that's one of the weird strengths Hans Christian Andersen had. Like, yeah, he completely made up the Snow Queen, but on the other hand, it kind of reads like he collected a story about the Snow Queen and then made it his own in how it's written. Like, it feels kind of like a grim collected oral tradition tale, because, you know, the Grimms were all like, let's go ahead and make this a little bit more Christian and let's flesh it out how we want.
Yeah.
It feels like that, but you know that actually Hans Christian Andersen made the whole thing up. Like, he just wrote a fairy tale. um I think that's a really cool thing that is a strong point of the Hans Christian Andersen tales, is that even if you end up not really liking Hans Christian Andersen's writing, like, The Snow Queen is not my favorite story to read. It's got some weird stuff in there. It's longer than it needs to be. It's his longest story, and it did not need to be.
I
Um,
agree.
and the things he devotes the page space to are weird choices. Uh, but at core, that character of the Snow Queen and that tale of Gerda going out to rescue her best friend Kay is so memorable that that's what we remember and think about. And that's what makes it into all the other stories inspired by the Snow Queen, is the Snow Queen herself and that Kay and Gerda story. Um, so I think, yeah, it definitely a first for the book club. This feels more like the original fairy tale than the original fairy tale does.
Hmm.
So very satisfying, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
And number 4, that naturally segued, we've already started to answer, what did this retelling do better than the original? It
Yeah,
was a
definitely more agency and depth to the characters. I thought it was interesting that both characters had names. A lot of fairy tales characters don't have names, but we actually have the original ones from the book,
mm-hmm.
or from the story in the book. And one thing I loved, that all the little magic parts along the way and these little different vignette stories in the book, they felt like they had more of a purpose.
Yeah. And they all
Uh,
tied together and felt internally coherent within the world. It felt like Hans Christian Andersen's story was just like, of course there's a random magical enchantress witch with a magic garden who, of course there is. Of course the
mhm.
river can choose to carry shoes around or not. Of course there is also a snow queen, but a hobgoblin, but a prince and a princess, but also just a regular town, but also, like, it's all over the place. And in this it's like, yeah, there's a coherent explanation for what magic is in the world and how it functions and who uses it, and the people who use it tend to know each other and be familiar with each other. So like, and I love that the thing that ties that together is that it's always the older woman who is familiar with the traditional lore who is the carrier of magic in some way. Like the grandmother who accidentally, in mentioning the Snow Queen, kind of calls her attention.
Mhm.
And then the woman who just lives in her house alone and is lonely and is like, Gerda will be safer here. I'll use my magic to just convince her to stay. And then the even like the elderly robber grandparents have their own kind of magic about them that just comes from being experienced and old and steeped in tradition. Like they know about the Snow Queen and they think it's freaking hilarious that Gerda's like got her attention because
Mhm.
that's great fun for them to laugh at her. Um, but I felt like that was really nice and really tied everything together really well. Um,
Right, we also had the one at like the inn with collecting tails, and her friend, and
yes, yeah,
the Finn woman, and
and the extra kind of fairy tale elements, like tell her your story's written on a fish, and like she'll think that's hilarious. Um, it's all really lovely the way that she makes the world feel really real and ties it all together. Um, I thought that something that I really appreciated that she did better than the original tale is that she helped explain why Gerda was attracted to Jana, the robber girl. Because it feels like in the Hans Christian Andersen story, it's just like, she keeps threatening to kill me with a knife, but she never did. So now she's coming, like we're friends, I guess.
but
Um,
yeah.
and it was like, okay, I guess you make your own choices, but she keeps threatening you with a knife. Feels like a not friendly thing to do. Uh, and the robber girl in Hans Christian Andersen, and this is true in the like animated film version that I remember growing up with. She's very flighty and she's very like mean, and it's always like it's just because she found it amusing that you're not dead, and she's selfish and she's like genuinely a thief, and she's not a positive person. She literally scared me when I would watch the original animated story. I was always like, oh my gosh, it's the robber part. I'm going to not watch for a moment when I was really little. But in this story, she gets the space to become a sympathetic character. She's still scary to Gerda at first, but then as they get to know each other, they can get to appreciate each other. Um, I feel like it was a really positive, better than the original thing, that instead of Gerda just winding up with Kay by default, she has the space to have this relationship with Jana. I thought that the romance and the discovery that they could have a romance between the robber girl and the girl who's just out to rescue Kay was a great character development for Gerda and was really lovely and a nice addition to the tale. So I would say that was better than the original. It would have been so disappointing if she just rescued Kay um, and still wanted to be with him, even though it clearly wasn't the right choice for her. Uh, yeah.
In addition to that, yeah, with her, we saw Gerda grow and change, and at the end, she doesn't go back and just stay home. She
Mm-hmm.
goes to visit people and to take Kay back, and then she wants to see the world. It's like I've already started to experience the world and heard about it from the robber and from the Raven, and she doesn't want to just settle at home anymore.
Yeah, she's grown into herself as an adult where now she has her own hopes and dreams that aren't tied to, I guess I'm just gonna like weave things like my grandma and Mary Kay. Like she's figured out that there's more to life and more possibilities out there, and she's eager to explore even more new possibilities instead of just settling down. And that's really beautiful. Um I felt like the way the Snow Queen was defeated was so much better than in the original.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't just sneak in while she was gone and then accidentally spell eternity on the floor somehow and then leave. Um, like the original tale. Um, Instead, it's a lot more about an actual like encounter, and it draws in the magic from earlier. Like if you're gonna let plants talk to Gerda, let all the plants talk to Gerda. Let's
Mm-hmm.
let her communicate with that. And I liked that it brought in like this isn't just a wall of ice, it is like ice covered actual briar thorns. And it gives, she even gave the plants agency, is what I'm saying. Like, that's beautiful.
Take your
um,
power back.
yeah.
Empowering.
It,
And then
yeah.
even the part with the other reindeer and having lost herself and kind of become more reindeer had a part of the story too. At the
Mhm.
end, it's like all these magic parts came together in defeating the Snow Queen
Yeah.
because she used that non-humanness to be able to resist the queen's gaze.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I guess another really big difference is how the reindeer presents. Like, she's actually riding a reindeer in the original story.
Mhm.
She's not skinning a reindeer and wearing its skin to become a reindeer so she can run on the magic reindeer road, which, let's be honest, feels way more fairy tale than just riding a reindeer. Good job at
Yep.
channeling your inner fairy tale, Kingfisher. We love
Again,
it.
more fairy tale Snow Queen. Yep.
But also she still gave the reindeer the agency to be able to say, you know,
It was its choice, its consent. Yeah.
let me do this thing to help you, and you just help to get my skin somewhere where I'm more comfortable with it ending up. Like the example of kind of honoring the reindeer but also being horrified by this, but also like there's a lot of, that's the part of the story. If you need a trigger warning at any point, um, it's for when Jana has to slit Gerda's throat as a reindeer every night so that she can come out of the reindeer skin. So then the reindeer transition back and forth. There it gets. I was just sitting reading this book over Thanksgiving, and at one point, my husband James was like, "Oh, what's happening in your book?" Because I was making faces, and I was like, "Gerda's a reindeer now. Uh, the reindeer things are happening." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, I I can't explain. I'm gonna keep reading now." And later he was like, "What's happening now?" And I was like, "She wasn't a reindeer, but she's a reindeer again. It just
And now she has to get cut
it makes
out.
sense in context, okay?" He was like, "I don't get it."
Yeah.
Uh, but I thought that was a very creative way to keep the reindeer there, but like it felt more fairy tale, even though it's not what was in the original tale.
And it also tied back to the story with the robber girl tickling the reindeer's neck with the knife.
Yeah. Yeah. She went from
Like
like,
maybe not the same way. It wasn't a threat, but it became part of the story.
yeah. She took that original element and was like, let's make it actually good. And that's, again, like a first for the book club, like across the board. If someone wanted to read The Snow Queen, I'd be like, "Oh, cool. So you're going to read The Raven and the Reindeer? Because that's what you
Yeah.
should read. Read that one." uh so we've already started to answer this, I think. But number 5, what
Yeah.
gaps did the retelling fill in that were missing in the original? Um agency. uh, why would Gerda want to end up with Kay when he's been a dick? We both get that answer, but also get the answer of ultimately she grows up enough that she wouldn't. She's gonna be with her girlfriend now, and they're really cute together. Haha. Hans Christian Andersen, eat it. Come up with your story, you don't get to own it anymore. But yeah,
Yeah,
I thought,
we confront the Snow Queen.
yes.
We actually feel the cold, which I think is a big part.
Yeah,
So this takes place with the setting, you'd imagine more cold, especially with bare feet. But yeah, Gerda, she has to hide under the bushes and sleep and find warmth.
Yeah, her travel feels a lot more grounded and real and difficult. Like she's
itself is a big element of the story.
Yeah, her very first night out, she's like, I hope that it's been hours, but it could only have been minutes. I'm miserable and it's dark and I'm scared and it's cold and I'm singing a hymn and my feet hurt and I don't think that I thought this through all the way. Mm-hmm. And it's really like it immerses you in the setting in a way that you don't get from the original story. I think the explanation too for, at least initially, how Gerda can communicate with plants and birds and such is a lot more present. The whole she soaks up the magic from being enchanted for so long that eventually the garden can communicate with her, and then she can just talk with the raven when she meets them, and the raven is like, oh yeah, later, oh yeah, I can still force myself to talk to you. It's a lot more difficult.
Human words,
like which is great because like ravens really are that smart. I could see a raven just being like, it wasn't worth it before, but now that I know you're cool, hi in English. But there's that initial explanation for like how she's doing these pretty unusual things, and also for how, and it all ties in together for how she ultimately is able to kind of face up to the Snow Queen. Like the magic, like she just doesn't have any magical ability, and to such an extent that like it doesn't enchant her in the same way, to the same strength.
Empty vessel.
Yeah. Which
I filled with magic, but is not magic.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool explanation for kind of part of what makes Gerda special, that still leaves all of the agency and decision making in what she has, but also explains why was she able to do something against the Snow Queen when the Snow Queen's this clearly ancient, incredibly powerful figure. Mm-hmm. As a complete aside that has nothing to do with any of this, I love the
introduction to your last question if you want.
Oh, you know what? I'll save that for the last question. I think we're at that point. I think we might be, yeah. So, number 6, any additional thoughts about this book? I'll just start off by saying I love the otters. And I love that she's just like giant talking flying otters. I love them. And I love that she went with that instead of in the original tale. Was it chickens? Like white chickens?
Yes. White chickens.
I feel like the otters are a straight upgrade.
Like the sleigh is the same, but the otters are way cooler and makes more sense with the setting.
I like that even the otters get to make their own decision and have like a character to them. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of fun. But the chickens, I was so much, because I didn't remember what pulled the Snow Queen's sleigh, and I went to revisit the original story after reading this book, and I was like, chickens? It was chickens? Okay. So anyway, I thought that I just enjoyed the otters. I have since learned horrifying facts about the real life habits of otters that I'm gonna just pretend I don't know. Don't look up the mating habits of otters. Just don't do it. It will ruin your day. But I love the otters in this book. They're great. What about
They
you,
connect
Mary?
words and languages. But yeah, I absolutely loved the Raven and like expecting more of it in the original tale. And then it's like, oh, the crow, and then the crow's fiance, and then the crow is dead. I'm like, wait,
Just
what?
out of
And that's it?
nowhere.
And he's gone?
And the fiance's mourning, and it's just like, why?
I know. I'm like, what?
Why'd you do that?
He has such an attitude and some of the best dialogue and just explains the magic so well.
Yeah, I feel like I'd
Yeah,
have
it's like
to,
limited
I
edition.
100% would have to consult the book to remember the Raven's full name,
Oh,
right?
see.
But I love the idea of that inclusion of your human names are kind of lame and way too short and not
Yeah,
meaningful enough. Here's my.
I quoted that part on in my blog review. Because I just love that whole scene.
Ah, like,
I am the sound of mouse bones crunching under the hooves of God.
yes, the sound
I
of
stole the
mouse
very
bones
shiniest
crunching.
words and hoarded them all up until they made something worth having. Sound and God were particularly well guarded. Crunching I found in a squirrel nest, though.
Like, so good. So good. I loved this
And then
book.
she's like, oh, well, that's a complicated name. And he's like, well, your name's like nothing. And she's
Yeah.
like, well, it's the same amount of letters as Herden and, the ones, Odin's ravens. And he's like, I don't really have a comeback for that.
Yeah. I appreciated that whole. He was like, oh, yeah, well,
um, my
fine.
name's still cool.
Yeah. No, the Raven, one of my favorite parts is just the character of the Raven. I loved how the Raven was like, excuse me while I have to reconsider my friendship with Jana because Gerda got kidnapped and she was supposed to be helped by my friend, and I feel betrayed and confused. Like, the Raven's character is so great. I loved this book.
And he's the one that had to relate communication to the reindeer
Mhm.
because no one else spoke reindeer. Like
Yeah.
she Gerda doesn't automatically speak to all the animals. There has to be, a reason.
Yeah. Uh any other additional thoughts?
I think we covered everything I had and just
Yeah.
really enjoyed this one. And
And I will say, for a very short while at the beginning of the book, I was a little bit like perplexed slash bothered. I was like, I'm not gonna let it disrupt my enjoyment of this, but why doesn't Gerda have parents? It's only ever her grandma that's mentioned. I don't understand. And then, problem solved, she actually just explains it and answers where's Gerda's parents later on in the book. So if you're starting this book and you're like, I don't know, that's too fairy tale for me. I need an explanation for the the oddness of I only have my grandma and no one else, and no one tells me why. That gets answered later. It just straight up gets answered. There are no unresolved issues to be found. Um,
no.
it's a beautiful book. I think whether you're looking for just a enjoyable fairy tale retelling, or you specifically want a lot more agency friendly, feminist, queer friendly retelling, or you just want to just read a good book and you don't care about fairy tales, you'll like this book. It's really good.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, for being based on a made up tale, it just felt so steeped in folklore.
yeah. And I
Even
think
if it
that's
wasn't.
that's something that I could tell the whole time that the author did her research into the customs and the lore of this particular setting. And then in the very end, in her Was it the acknowledgments? Yeah, in her acknowledgments, I love that they just start with the sentence, Hans Christian Andersen was a weird dude. That's fact. But also
Hmm.
her acknowledgments, like she's specifically naming people who 100%, like you can tell she did absolutely do the research to do justice to these languages and customs and this area of the world. Like the Nina Siviko, the Finnish Sami cultural historian, and Heli Kinnunen, a Finnish folklore major, and Foxfeather Zenkova, and like, you know, like the people, like she talked to people who are experts so that she could do justice to this.
Hmm.
You can tell Hans Christian Andersen didn't do that. Like he, you know, it was very Christian,
Random
but
prince
not.
and princess
Yeah,
and
just
Christian.
throw them
Yeah.
in. But it just it comes across really well. So if you find yourself reading it and going, "Wow, I feel like this person actually cared," and I feel like I might be getting an accurate depiction, or at least a pretty darn accurate depiction of some traditional lore and figures and customs, you totally are. And I love that. Like, that's something I feel like has been missing in a number of fairy tale retellings I've read that take place like in cultures and regions of the world that are foreign to the author. The author doesn't always do the correct amount of due diligence for it to feel really vibrant and real and really respectful of those areas. And I feel like massive kudos to this author. She absolutely did her homework and her research, and it comes across beautifully. And it's still a very readable, like, I sat down and read this over the course of like a few hours on Thanksgiving and loved it and immediately wanted to read it a second time. But it's a light, approachable, but really rich read, which is
Yeah.
exactly what I love most. So, any other thoughts?
Nope.
Well, across the board, as you can tell, Mary and I 100% recommend this book. I know I'm going to go read more books by T. Kingfisher and Ursula
Oh,
Vernon,
definitely.
whichever pen name she's using. I respect her as an author, and I'm excited to see she writes some horror. You've read at least one of her horror books, right, Mary?
Yeah, the Twisted One's another very folklore rich,
Mhm. And if
but
I
horror.
remember correctly, you have a review of the Twisted Ones up on your blog. Did I make that up in my head?
I'm not sure if I reviewed that one. If not, I should.
If there isn't a
I'd have
review of the Twisted Ones on Mary's blog, look forward to seeing that in the near future. Um, but yeah, I come to think of it, I think I own the Twisted Ones. I might just read that one next.
There you go.
But definitely check out T. Kingfisher. Absolutely check out this book, The Raven and the Reindeer. And Mary and I look forward to seeing you next year for our 4 book picks for the Enchanted Garden Book Club. Have a wonderful end of your year, everybody. And see you next time. Bye.
Bye.